This is Frank Gaffney with the Secure Freedom Minute. One of the defining moments of the Cold War took place in June 1963 when President John F. Kennedy declared in German, "I am a Berliner." This statement communicated to the Kremlin that there would be real costs if it tried to end that city's highly symbolic opposition to communist oppression. JFK succeeded in deterring a Soviet assault on West Berlin. Today, another city that is similarly an outpost of freedom faces an imminent threat from another ruthless communist regime. The people of Hong Kong urgently need a similar expression of solidarity to deter a seemingly imminent Chinese crackdown. America's bipartisan leadership should declare today that we are Hong Kongers. If combined with a commitment to end the Chinese Communist ability to exploit Hong Kong's most favored nation trade status in the event its autonomy is ended, deterrence may just work again. This is Frank Gaffney.
That is Frank Gaffney, Center for Security Policy, securefreedom.org, counterjihad.com, and the chair of the Committee on the Present Danger China, presentdangerchina.org. Now, Frank, let's talk a little bit about, let's set the stage first. I'm going to ask you about your call for the White House, the administration, our government to declare that we're all Hong Kongers. But let's set the stage. What's going on in Hong Kong right now? The protests, flights canceled to Hong Kong airport for a second day in a row. Violent protest videos with police crackdowns taking place are pretty much ubiquitous on the internet at this point. What do you think? What's going on? Give us the details.
What's going on at the moment, Alex, is that the boa constrictor of Chinese repression is inexorably tightening on Hong Kong. The people there are still demonstrating their determination to retain at least the autonomy that was promised them, and if possible, to grow it, to expand, as we see with the waving of American flags, for example, their ability to actually exercise democratic choices over their governance. But what I fear is now beginning to take shape is the Chinese mainland Communist Party government has decided that they're going to use proxies, if you will, or at least disguised personnel to do the rough work of brutalizing the people of Hong Kong and arresting them or maiming them or simply dispatching them, all of which I think is unfortunately in prospect. And what makes so important, what that little commentary just tried to convey, is we need to be heard from before this goes any further. And I fear that, as we saw with the president's efforts to sort of navigate his way through the minefield of not angering the Chinese too much, but not abandoning the people of Hong Kong too much, with his comments and tweets yesterday, we're falling short. And this expression, "we are Hong Kongers," again, combined with the idea that there have to be real costs made clear to the Chinese if they go down this road, if the autonomy of Hong Kong is snuffed, as I fear is imminent, that is the thing that I think the president needs to have as, his stand before this goes down. After it happens, it'll be too late. And the irony of this is, Alex, as you know, I'm sure, it's the law of the land. We actually have a statute on the books that says if Hong Kong's autonomy is, diminished, interfered with, dispensed with, whatever verb you want to use, by China, they will cease to have the benefits of Hong Kong's most favored nation status with the United States, which is a trade loophole that they have exploited to their very, very considerable benefit on the mainland. So this is something that's going to happen, I believe. It should be made clear now that it will be a cost if Hong Kong's freedom, such as it is left, is denied it further by the Chinese Communist Party.
So, do you think that politically, and I want to ask about because the president's he's got tough calls to make here because I think that logically, I mean, everyone is very hopeful in this case that the Hong Kong prevails here. China's knocked back on their heels, but the president has to deal with a trade war that's going on with China. He's got a lot of stuff geopolitically he needs to work through. Do you think it's strategic for him to come out and openly back Hong Kong at this point?
Look, Alex, you mentioned the Committee on the Present Danger of China, which I'm privileged to be the vice chairman of. What we have, I believe, demonstrated in the past 4 or 5 months of operations is this is not a trade war. We are in the midst of an economic war at minimum. Unrestricted warfare is what the Chinese themselves have called it, that has been going on for decades. President Trump is trying through trade negotiations to try to change some of the characteristics of that war against us. Not one we seek, not one we want, but one that has nonetheless been waged against us by communist China. And I think it's just very short-sighted and ultimately doomed to treat what is going on now as though we can't say certain things or we can't stand for certain things vis-a-vis Hong Kong, lest it interfere with the achievement of a trade deal that at the very best, will have some good new commitments from China. They'll stop stealing our intellectual property. They'll stop manipulating their currency. They'll stop predatory trade practices. And that's the very best case. There'll be new promises. But we know that they never honor their promises. So the best case is unlikely to amount to much. And the more likely case is we won't get that much in the way of new promises. We'll just get something that maybe involves purchases of soybeans. And I'm sympathetic to the needs of our farmers, but the Chinese are not reliable trade partners. They're not reliable partners in any sense. They are, I believe, determined under Xi Jinping to end our dominance. And in the course of it, the United States, as the power that has been in the world, the power for good. And that's the objective of the Chinese Communist Party. Make no mistake about it. Hong Kong is just one of the places where they are seeking to change the world order, if you will, the Pax Americana, the free world as we've known it. And I think it would be, again, imperative for the president to make it clear that we stand with the people of Hong Kong, not with communist China.
Okay, so a couple of questions here, Frank. Again, for the record, I'm with you on this. I'm sure the president's got a lot of information I don't have on this, but I like the idea of him taking the lead here. But first question is, what happens if he does? What changes? So if the president comes out, takes a bold stand against communist China, for Hong Kong, for the protesters, what does that look like? What happens then?
We can't say for sure, Alex. I think the Chinese government is now so concerned that what's going on in Hong Kong is likely to migrate to the mainland, that they will press on. And they may do it through these cutouts, as I say, to make it the television coverage of the repression less dramatic than it would otherwise be if it's just People's Liberation Army forces doing the breaking of heads or, murder of people, rounding them up. But there's a chance. I believe there's still a chance that we can dissuade the Chinese from doing this by making it clear that there will be real costs to them for engaging in such behavior. And at the very least, that's the side we want to be on. If this does go badly, heaven help President Trump and I think America more generally, if it has seemed to be the case that, well, as long as the Chinese feel entitled to do certain things, we're going to stand by. What's next? Taiwan? They feel entitled to take.
Oh, I've already gone there. I already
get it.
Exactly. I think that's totally. I think that's the exact right call. And if you would go and if you go to Taiwan, I mean, the Chinese consider Taiwan still part of one China. So, but then again, Frank, we're all part of one China. That's the whole point. Is that it's the whole planet. So it's just a matter of time. So
we are vassal states to it in waiting, and that's what I'm worried about. We need to deter that as well.
Sure, and again, it's if I had in my list, if I had to recommend 5 books, I always would put in there Michael Pillsbury's book, The 100-Year Marathon, because you start understanding about how China is really in economic warfare. You're correct about this. They're about two-thirds of the way through their 100-year process. So, and they really want to dominate the world economically. It's not about building up a big military. It's about building up a dependence. The world will be dependent on them economically, and then they can do whatever they want. It's a genius strategy, and they've been relatively polite about it, which is exactly why it's working. So, Frank,
Alex, could I just say,
yeah,
I'm sorry,
please.
A small clarification.
Please.
It is about a military buildup as well. And this
Sure.
is one of the things that they've gotten away with, primarily by being secretive about it and somewhat duplicitous. The hide and bide strategy, as Deng Xiaoping famously called it. But the power of China's military is now unmistakable, including in terms of its Blue Water Navy and the combination of the military and the infrastructure build-out that they're doing under the form of this so-called Belt and Road Initiative, which is giving them bases and airfields and other transportation assets around the world from which to project power. It's economic in the first instance, to be sure. You're absolutely right about that. But these other capabilities for waging not just unrestricted warfare of the kind of asymmetric kind. That's another great book, by the way, too. People's Liberation Army senior colonels wrote it back in 1999, and it's really been the roadmap for what they've been doing in waging this war against us all these years. This is a problem that I believe, however, is now increasingly accompanied by a very formidable military threat as well.
Yeah, and there's no doubting that, especially considering what's happening in the South China Sea. I'm just noting that, Frank, the primary the tactic, not saying there isn't a military component, but it's basically getting us to feel like we can't make any moves, that we can't do anything to stand up to them because of economic factors. And it is taking away any ability we have to taking pieces off the board because economic dependence. That's sort of the overarching point I'm trying to make. I'm not to.
Amen.
It was not my intention to discount the military factor. Speaking of. Convoy armed Chinese police vehicles massing near Hong Kong. What is the significance here?
Well, again, it's creating an option for the Chinese to use the naked power of the old-fashioned kind, men in uniforms, armored equipment, and the like. I think for the moment, it's a calculation that may have a deterrent effect on the people of Hong Kong. But I think what's accompanying it at the very least, and my guess is that they will use it as the alternative to that kind of raw power, at least in the immediate term, is going to be these so-called police who are donning the outfits of the protesters, or donning white garb and using thuggish tactics to brutalize them, out of uniform, in other words, less clearly identifiable, serving as provocateurs, among other things, to create conditions under which the military or the police at the very least can crack down. These are the sorts of things that I think the Chinese are past masters at, and I think that's what we should most immediately expect. It's happening already to some extent, but I think it'll ratchet up intensively here in the days ahead, especially if we do nothing to discourage it.
Sure. So do you have a prediction on where this goes, and if the president does take a bold stand here, or if we do alter our policy at all in order to get to convey that we're taking this seriously?
Look, my hope is that there will be a very strong, and it seems definitely possible now, bipartisan statement of opposition to what the Chinese are doing and solidarity with the people of Hong Kong. And it may just stave off this brutal repression that is, I think, otherwise in the offing. Unfortunately, especially in the absence of that kind of expression by the United States, Alex, I think we're going to watch Hong Kong crushed, and the stage set for a lot of other unpleasant things in the region and probably beyond as well, because the Chinese Communist Party will be emboldened by what it gets away with there.
Certainly. So a couple other follow-ons here is, first of all, Xi Jinping is more AWOL than President Trump in this scenario. He's nowhere to be found. They even put out a statement in Chinese state media from 2017. If he's supposed to be this great charismatic leader with incredible command over his gigantic country and ambitions to take over the world, why isn't he a factor in this? If he is so popular, where is he right now?
Well, he's been meeting with his senior cohort in their annual August retreat. I don't think there's any doubt at the moment that he's pulling the strings. He may simply be calculating that there's no point in him being the face of what's going to go down here. Not that he's, again, going to be other than, the leader of China, presumably, but it may be that he's facing some internal pressure as well to do something about this, and has decided that he'll take a somewhat lower profile for the moment while he sorts this out. But the danger is, and I thank you so much for what you guys do at Breitbart, including on the air, Alex, but what is afoot here is the realization by Xi Jinping of what he calls the China dream. And as long as he is running things, as long as the Chinese Communist Party is running things, we're going to see more aggressive behavior from China in a whole host of ways. And I think, again, if people want to learn more about this, presentdangerchina.org is another great resource.
Absolutely.
But we've got to be mindful. That's what we're up against here.
Sure. So, and here's a depressing question that comes from a listener, which is, again, is the United States alone on this against all the bad authoritarians around the world? Is there anyone at our side here who is an ally in this, who has an impact?
Look, I think this is a place where leadership is indispensable. There are an increasing number of places, countries, notably, that are now being subjected to this Belt and Road Initiative, death trap operation, as it's called, that are restive in the extreme about what the Chinese are doing. They're colonizing lots of these places. I think there are allies in even Europe, which has been penetrated deeply, among other things, by Huawei and its 5G network as the coming digital imperial tool for China, that are realizing that this is a serious problem. I think in the Far East, our allies, at least the Japanese, and I think the people of South Korea, if not the government of South Korea, are very concerned about what the Chinese are up to, as are lots of the smaller nations. Australia is quite spun up about this, and properly so. So yes, but at the end of the day, it does require the American government leading. And I really fear that unless and until the president decides that this trade deal is not worth the investment he's been making in it, and it's not actually going to benefit us, let alone offset the other things that are so ominous about what China is up to. And that's the basis upon which I believe we can pull together the free world, as it's long been called, to defend itself once again against our time's existential threat to freedom. The words of Ronald Reagan.
And Frank, the Huawei founder this week, and I saw this virtually nowhere, but he said that he wants an invincible iron army to fight the United States. It's the... And he says he needs the 3 to 5 years basically to get it ready. And then there's going to be an invincible iron army. I'm not going to purport to understand exactly what he means, but it certainly doesn't sound very good, Frank.
Well, it certainly doesn't sound like he's just a businessman, does it?
It certainly does not.
It sounds to me as though He's an instrument of the Chinese Communist Party and its agenda of world domination. And that's not the only quote, by the way, from this guy. And one of the reasons why I hope we will succeed in extraditing his daughter from Canada and putting her on trial is to expose what she knows about what this company is up to. And iron may not be the perfect metaphor here. Maybe it's digital army, but what he's doing in terms of building the infrastructure for penetrating and controlling the 5G domain, Alex, is an act of warfare. There's no question about it. And we disregard it, we discount it, we try to give waivers for people to work with them and so on at our extreme peril.
You know, and also, Pillsbury goes into this in great detail, how the translations are intentionally very difficult with the Chinese language. So it's tough to know if that's literally what he said, because that's one of the whole points of Chinese language is it is tough to translate in other languages, which is strategically advantageous. So if you guys don't think we have a worthy adversary here, you guys are not paying attention. And Frank, this is I don't tend to get you, mostly because our time is precious. We get 20 minutes a week together, and I want to hear your thoughts on international issues. But I can't resist getting your take on a lot of the gun control talk that is taking place right now. And we are this is a massive geopolitical threat China poses. It's certainly the greatest since the Cold War, in my view, and that exceeds the level of the jihadists, which I think is a close second. But I still think that this is number one and the greatest threat in at least 30 years, maybe longer, to this country. And we're talking about disarming our law-abiding citizens. It just seems unfathomable to me that a sane country would do this.
We're being driven to it. Let's be clear. And I think some of the commentary that I heard this morning about the red flag laws is truly very, very worrying in terms of our freedoms. And it's unfortunately not just the Second Amendment. There are about 4 others that are also going to be impacted if we go down this road. But I really am among those who fear very much, if not the immediate effects of this, the inevitable knock-on effects, that we're going to find people denouncing the likes of thee and me as people who shouldn't be allowed to have guns or worse, and therefore, we'll have our fundamental rights, let alone our ability to defend ourselves, compromised or simply, negated. And that is a national security problem, I believe, as well. The founders were right to insist that this was essential to preserving freedom, our right to keep and bear arms. And I fear that we lose it. We do indeed ultimately lose our freedoms more generally.
Frank Gaffney, powerful as always. I have some Middle East topics for you, but maybe we'll come back to those next week. Executive Chairman of the Center for Security Policy, Vice Chair of the Committee on the Present Danger China, presentdangerchina.org. Thanks again, my friend.
My pleasure as always. Thank you, Alex.
All right, we'll be right back.